Are you looking for a way to level up your historical clothing? Are you entering a competition and need a way to increase that score? Do you have a desire to make your clothing more historically accurate? Then hand sewing is the way to go. In this video, I am going to walk you through 3 documentable clothing construction stitches used during the 16th century. Hi, I'm Elena, and I am one half of Thimble and Plume. We're longtime historical reenactors, and this channel is our way of sharing the things we've learned over the years about how to make historical clothing. During the 16th century, most clothing was made by tailors in tailors' shops. They would stitch all the garments by hand because they just didn't have sewing machines yet. Because they were making clothes for money and it was business, they had to find methods of working that were more efficient. So speed was important. This is reflected in the way that clothing was put together and the way that the stitches were done. So the number one most important thing about these stitches is that they were done from the top of the fabric, and so the needle doesn't need to travel much between the stitches. Unlike, the Victorian women sitting in their parlor taking long, tiny stitches. So it was about speed, it was about efficiency, it wasn't about perfection. So I want you to keep that in mind as I walk you through how to do 3 stitches that are documentable as clothing construction stitches during the 16th century. They are the running stitch, the back stitch, and we're going to combine the two and do a running back stitch. The running stitch is a fast stitch, but it's not very strong. So you want to reserve this for the times when you're going to be doing long seams that will not be under a lot of strain. A possibility for this would be your skirt seam. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up from underneath my fabric. So I've got my stitch ready to go. I'm going to just go a little ways away from where I came out, put my needle back in, and I'm going to slide underneath and come back out. Just like that. And so I've made 1 stitch. I'm going to repeat that again. I'm going to go a little distance away from where I came out, slide the needle under the fabric. You can see it's going on the underside like that. Pull it through. And again, in the fabric, slide along, come out just a little bit of ways. Now, what I can do is I can go a little bit faster by doing several stitches at once. So I'm going to do this by going in, out, in, out, in, out, and pull. So one of the things you'll find is that as you get kind of into the rhythm of each stitch has its own rhythm. And so when you're sitting down and you have your good body mechanics and you just get into the groove of stitching, you'll find each stitch has its own rhythm. So for example, this stitch is, I'm going to do in, out, in, out, pull. In, out, pull. So can you hear the rhythm that happens there as you're doing it? In, out, pull. And something that you'll notice too is when you are sitting down and you have a really good body posture and you're getting into your groove and you're finding the rhythm, your stitches will become incredibly even. Will they be perfect? Probably not. And that's okay, because right now what we're going for is we're going for efficiency and we're going for speed. So as long as you have those 2 things, you win. So then, so you just keep going until you finish your seam, and then you'll just tie off as usual. So I like to tie off. What I'll do is I'll do a back stitch into my previous, just a little bit behind it. It kind of locks it in place. I'll do that twice. And if I can get right back into the same area I came out of before, that's good. So, and then on this last one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie off. So I've come out of the hole. I'm going to go back in. I like to do this twice. So you can see I'm wrapped around this little loop twice. And then as I pull it, if I keep my thumb there, I can kind of guide it in and it won't, and so then basically I've now created a little tiny knot. There you have it. There is your running stitch. Next up, we're going to do a back stitch. Now, your back stitch is the strongest of all the hand stitches, so it's perfect for doing any sort of seam that's going to be under tension, like your bodice seam or your crotch seam. It does take a little bit longer to work. All right, so what we're going to do, I've already come out. I'm going to take my first stitch, which is basically just like a running stitch. So I'm going to do in, out. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my last previous stitch. I'm going to go in where I came out of that stitch. I'm going to float underneath my fabric past this current, where I came out, my very last, right here. I'm going to float past it and come out the other side. I want to keep an equal distance on either side. And so there's my stitch. I'm going to repeat that. I'm going to go backwards, okay, to the place where I went in last. And I'm going to go ahead and put my needle into the same spot. Underneath, I'm floating underneath. I don't know if you can see my needle. I'm floating underneath. And I'm coming out on the opposite side of this thread, trying to stay equally distant between where I'm coming out and where I went in previously. Okay, and I'm going to go back in that last stitch that I just pulled, floating underneath, coming back out the other side. Again, going back. So I'm going in that previous stitch. I'm going past, that's where I came out before, where I came out. I'm going back in. Again, I want to keep that as evenly spaced as I can. And then back, float past, out the other side. Come back into my previous stitch, float past, back into my previous stitch, float past, come out the other side, and pull. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the comment section below. And also, if you're learning something, if you're enjoying this, if you like what we're doing here, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button and sign up for notifications. So back in the previous stitch, float under, come out. Back to my previous stitch, float under and past and come out. Back to my previous stitch, float under, back past and come out. All right, just like that. Okay, I'm running out of thread here, so I'm going to go ahead and tie off now instead of getting to the end. So the way that I like to tie off is I will go back again. Wow, I came out kind of far on that one. So I'll kind of just complete. I'm going to come back out where I just did. So I'm not going to go past this stitch. So it's kind of my final back stitch. I'm going to do that again, but before I pull it tight, I want to tie off, and this is the way I like to tie off. I leave my loop, I'm going to go through my loop once. I'm going to go through my loop a second time, and then I'm going to pull that, creating a little knot in my fabric. So there we go. There's our back stitch. So now we're going to do the running back stitch. So you've learned the running stitch, you've learned the back stitch. Now we're just going to combine the two. This is a great kind of intermediary sort of stitch. It's not as weak as the running stitch, but it's not as strong as the back stitch. But it also works up a lot faster than the back stitch. This is great for something that I wouldn't use it for like the seams that are under the most tension, but I use this for most other seams. I even like to use it on my skirt seams because it just gives it that little extra security that I want. So it's really easy. So we're going to start out, we're going to take a stitch. I'm going to do a back stitch here. Okay, then I'm going to do like 3 running stitches. So there's 1, 2, 3 running stitches. You could do 2, 3, whatever. You know, take your pick. The less running stitches you do, the stronger the seam will be. So I've done 3 running stitches. Now I'm going to take another back stitch. I'm going to do 3 little running stitches. Back stitch. Running stitches. Back stitch. And then I'm just going to go straight into those running stitches. You can see how much faster this works up than the back stitch does. So what's your favorite stitch so far? Have you used these stitches? Let me know in the comment section. What do you find the hardest to do? I am terrible at the back stitch, I'll be honest. It is not my favorite stitch. I am impatient. My favorite stitch is actually the fell stitch. So I'll be doing another series. That is what I consider a finishing stitch. So I'll be doing a whole series about finishing stitches where I'll talk about the fell stitch. That is my favorite stitch. It's a beautiful stitch and I can work it very quickly and evenly. It's a stitch that shows on the outside, so of course I take my time doing it. All right, so we've reached the end, and again, I'm going to tie off, and I realize on the back stitch I tied off on the front. You don't really want to tie off on the front. Usually you want to go to the back side. So I'll go through my back stitch to the back side. Here, I'm going to go back through again, and I'm going to pull it until I get a small circle, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in once and in a second time and pull. And so there we go. I have my nice knot now on the back side of my fabric. There it is. We have running stitch, back stitch, and a running back stitch. Thank you for watching. If you found this information valuable, then make sure to hit that subscribe button and sign up for notifications. And follow us on Instagram at Thimble and Plume. And as always, if you have any questions, please make sure to ask them in the comment section below.